Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your support for the Heritage Foundation. This is an amazing institution, and I'm so happy to be joining you to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the founding of this amazing organization. Over the last 50 years, the Heritage Foundation has done such amazing work to advance its principles, like limited government and free markets and individual liberty. This has been absolutely instrumental in shaping the American political landscape. It's made policymakers better informed. It's allowed more Americans to become more engaged. And I thank you for supporting and working within the Heritage Foundation. As we celebrate these remarkable achievements over the last half-century, reflecting on what lies ahead for America is really important, more now than ever. We're approaching our nation's 250th anniversary. And as we think about that, we've got to imagine what lies ahead and what's really at stake. From the economy to healthcare to education, to the way our system of government operates. These things are significant. Heritage's contributions are indispensable. And our decisions will have far-reaching impacts that will stretch another 50 and indeed another 250 years into the future. But we've got to do something important, something that Heritage is always advocating for. These decisions must be our decisions. They must be decisions we make rather than having them foisted upon us. Reminds me of a headline that I saw a few months ago, and I believe it was in Huffington Post. Prince Harry, someone I always try to quote as often as I can, was giving a speech at that venerable democratic institution known as the United Nations, and he started lecturing the American people on this global assault on democracy, due in large part, as I remember, to his disagreement with the Supreme Court's decision in the Dobbs case. And I thought, I wonder if he understands all the layers of irony that goes along with this. I mean, first of all, obviously, you have a Supreme Court precedent that had taken away, removed from the democratic process, the ability of the people to determine their own laws. He missed that part. He missed the part that he is himself the great-great-great-great-grandson of King George III, not just once, but twice. I think both of his parents were related to King George III. And so this prompted me ultimately to tweet, and I'm very proud of this one, "Love being lectured on democracy by an actual prince." Best tweet ever. Look, I first got into this business for that reason, because I believe the American people deserve to be in charge of their own destiny, deserve to be in charge of their own government. That's really why we fought the revolution, because decisions were being made far from us by a large, distant national government, one that taxed us too much, one that regulated us excessively, one that sent forth swarms of officers to eat out our substance. It was so slow to respond to our needs that it caused a lot of problems. I first ran for office because of these concerns and seeing echoes of that, and seeing the fact that the federal government has simply drifted much too far from its constitutional moorings. Now, in many respects, it can become most obvious that we've drifted far from some of the affirmative prohibitions in the Constitution. Yeah, we've seen a deterioration of our rights under the First, Second, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments, just to name a few. But I believe that the original sin of drifting from the Constitution is much more basic than that. It's much more fundamental than that. This original sin all emanates from our drift from the Constitution's two fundamental structural protections. And by this, I mean the vertical protection of federalism, which of course identifies the relationship between the states and the federal government, and the horizontal protection, which we call separation of powers, which within the federal government identifies the areas of responsibility within the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Our drift away from both of these things occurred simultaneously, one propelling the other. And it's from this fundamental deviation that all other departures from the Constitution can be traced. By contrast, by restoring these protections, I think we can heal most, if not all, other weakening of the Constitution. Let me explain a little bit what I mean. So the Constitution puts the federal government in charge of just a few basic things. It's not a general purpose government. Those are states. States and their political subdivisions, cities, towns, counties, and so forth. The federal government has just a limited purpose. It's, think of it as your homeowners association, but with an army. It has to be able to identify something in its charter, the Constitution, in order to be able to act. We can't just say it would be a good idea if we did X, Y, or Z. We have to identify something. To do that, normally you have to look to Article 1, Section 8, which is where nearly every power Congress has, the federal government has, can be found. There's nothing in there that just says pass laws for the good of the people. That doesn't exist. And if someone tells you otherwise, they're misreading parts of Article 1, Section 8. So what does it put us in charge of? Well, it puts Congress, the federal government, in charge of national defense, weights and measures, trademarks, copyrights, and patents, puts us in charge of immigration and naturalization, control of our border, or, we're supposed to do that. It puts us in charge of regulating trade or commerce between the states with foreign nations and with the Indian tribes, of establishing Navy and armies, militias, which we now call the National Guard. There are a few other powers, but you get the idea. This is the basic gist of it. That's more or less the big picture landscape. And that's about as far as it goes. Everything else, with good reason, is relegated, reserved to the states or to the people. Because it's the state and local level where government tends to be the most accountable to the people. It doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. It just means it's easier to turn it around. Think of the difference between driving an aircraft carrier and a jet ski. You can turn around a jet ski really fast. And if you've got one of your kids with you on the back of the jet ski, you can turn around so fast that they'll go flying off and skipping across the lake like a rock. Not that I've tried that, but it's been known to happen. An aircraft carrier might take you, I don't know, a half mile or a mile to turn because it's really big. And the Founding Fathers understood this dynamic. That's why they put only a few basic powers with us, because we're harder to turn around. So this careful balance of power between the three branches and between the federal power and the state power remained in balance really until the mid-1930s. And it worked really well. It ushered in the longest, most sustained, most remarkable, most unforeseen peacetime economic expansion, perhaps in the world's history. But it started to change in the mid-1930s during Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal program. You see, prior to the New Deal, the collective expenditures of the states had always exceeded the expenditure of the federal government, at least with the sole exception of a couple of wartime contexts in which other things became necessary and then returned to normal. After the New Deal era, it has always remained the case that the federal government spends more than every state in the entire country combined. That is a problem, and it's never been restored since then. So this broadening of federal power is itself a problem. And I trace it back personally to one date, April 12th, 1937. It was 2 years to the date that the Supreme Court had moved into its current building. And the Supreme Court decided a case called NLRB versus Jones and Laughlin Steel Company. It didn't catch the notice of a lot of people. Many Washington insiders were aware of it. Basically, the Supreme Court reimagined, reinterpreted Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, the Commerce Clause, to give Congress the power not just to regulate interstate commercial transactions, to make sure that the states weren't erecting commercial barriers to trade between them, but it gave Congress the power to regulate anything and everything that in the aggregate affects interstate commerce, which means Congress could now regulate everything. If Congress could imagine it and had lawyers clever enough to write it the right way, Congress could regulate it. All of a sudden, what was supposed to be this dynamic that Madison described in Federalist 45, is the federal government having powers, they're described as few and defined, and the state's powers numerous and indefinite. It's like they flipped the pyramid on its head. So all of a sudden, Congress had this enormous power to regulate labor, manufacturing, agriculture, mining, health, safety, welfare. All those things, to the extent they could do anything about them in the past, they had to be tied to something else, to their military power or some other enumerated power. All of a sudden now they could just do anything. This created a curious shift, because newly possessed of all these powers, federal lawmakers would have to make more laws in more areas and be more accountable to more people because they were making more laws in more areas. They didn't want that. It requires a lot of work. And people get mad at you when you pass laws that hurt people. So they started a new dangerous thing. At the same time, they had just shifted the balance of power between the states and the federal government, the vertical protection. They said, we're not just going to be content to make laws anymore. We're going to make other lawmakers. So Congress started passing laws that sound more like platitudes. We shall have good law in area X, and we hereby delegate to Commission Y the power to create rules that will be enforced as laws, and they will carry it out, and we won't be accountable. Now, they did this because it was easier and because they wouldn't get challenged as easily. It's gone on and on ever since then. It got so bad, I mean, they passed laws saying things like, we shall have good and fair prices for crops, and we hereby delegate to the U.S. Department of Agriculture the power to prescribe limits on how much wheat someone can produce in a year. A guy named Roscoe Filburn got caught up in this web. He got charged thousands of dollars in fines based on the fact that he grew too much wheat on his farm in present-day Dayton, Ohio suburbs. He challenged that, saying, no, we can't do that. This wheat, the wheat by which I exceeded my grain production quota, it never left my farm at all. It never entered interstate commerce. You can't regulate it. And the Supreme Court came back, this was in 1942, in a case called Wickard v. Filburn, and said, but by not selling your wheat and keeping it on your farm, you refrained from buying other wheat on the open interstate market. And by doing that, you had a substantial effect on interstate commerce. I mean, this is like the butterfly theory, but for wheat. The Supreme Court upheld that restriction. And so within Wickard v. Filburn, you see the perfect illustration. Congress conquered new domain, agriculture. Congress didn't want to legislate. It outsourced it to the Department of Agriculture. Agriculture came up with arbitrary limits. Those were enforced. This is a system that's been perpetuated to this day. We have executive branch agencies all the time issuing edicts. And all of a sudden, politicians, when they get one of these that's unpopular with their constituents, as has been known to happen, like when they designate certain areas out of ozone attainment because they set their ozone limits in the EPA, sometimes below where Mother Nature herself sets them, in the absence of human activity. People complain. You know what politicians do then? They beat their chests and they say, those barbarians at EPA, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write them a harshly worded letter, as if that were our job. So look, this system has become more and more common. It's really good for a few people. It's good for politicians whose sole aspiration is achieving and maintaining lifetime incumbency. It's really good for bureaucrats, nameless, faceless people who, while hardworking and well-intentioned and specialized in whatever, would never get elected to dog catcher because, you know, it's not really their thing. And all of a sudden, they're treated as emperors, at least as princes. It's really good for a small handful of accountants, lawyers, compliance specialists, and lobbyists who make their money off of complexity. As Arthur Brooks used to say, complexity is itself a subsidy. But it's really bad for everyone else. Everyone else. And by everyone else, I mean everyone. Because every single one of us suffers as a result of that. Because these regulations, these things passed into law, not by people who you elected, cost the American economy $2 to $3 trillion every single year. It's like a backdoor invisible tax, but you don't know how much it is or who's responsible for it because it's buried into the price of every single thing you buy, every good, every service, and it also comes out of diminished wages, unemployment, and underemployment. It disproportionately affects and hurts America's poor and middle class, the lifeblood of our economy. And so for reasons that have become cultural within Washington, especially within Congress, we've, as a people, just started to accept that that's the way things were, that, we as a Congress delegated, and that's what we do. And then when agencies do something we don't like, we write them a harshly worded letter. But that's not the government the founders envisioned. Heck, it's not even the government the founders created. It's not the government that our Constitution, to which we've all sworn an oath who hold these offices, requires. We're straying further from it every single day. That is what is at stake. It's about accountability to the public. It's about the Republican form of government as a whole. It's about Article 1, Sections 1 and 7, which make clear that you cannot pass a federal law without going through this prescribed formula, where both houses of Congress pass the same proposed law, submit it to the president for signature, veto, or acquiescence. And the president either signs it, acquiesces, or vetoes it, and then if it's Congress overrides it with 2/3 supermajority votes in each house, then it may become a law. Without that Article 1, Section 7 formula, there is and can be and must never be federal law. And yet we do it all the time. Madison, as if envisioning this moment and fearing that it might one day arise, but not envisioning it completely, commented on this in Federalist number 62. Here's how he put it. Quote, "It will be of little avail to the people that their laws are made by men of their own choice, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood, if they be repealed or revised before they're promulgated, or undergo such incessant changes that no man knows what the law is today, can guess what it will be tomorrow," close quote. So we're now in this circumstance. It's every bit as bad as, in fact, far worse than what James Madison could have contemplated with that, because not only are our laws so voluminous and complex and ever-changing that no sane person, in fact, no person of ordinary intelligence at all, no person without being able to devote full time to reading the Code of Federal Regulations and the Federal Register, which is the annual cumulative index of all the new regulations as they're released, no person could keep up with the legal obligations. So it's voluminous and complex, but it's even worse than that. These laws are not even written by men and women of our own choosing. That is tyranny, and that is wrong. I'm reminded of this feature every time I look at the stacks of documents behind my desk that I keep in the Senate. One stack is a few inches tall. It's usually a few hundred to a few thousand pages long, and it consists of the laws passed by Congress last year. The other stack is 13 feet tall. In a warm year, it'll crest the 100,000 page mark in 1 year, and that is the Federal Register. This document, which I keep in my office, is a monument to Satan himself, and I look forward to its everlasting destruction. On top of all this, we've made it very difficult to challenge those administrative rules. It's like they're telling us, heads we win, tails you lose, to the American people every time. Deferential standards of review in the courts leave it very, very easy for them to rule your life and stand without accountability. The loose, broad language we give them means that the sky is the limit with them. The sheer volume of delegations of lawmaking power we give them utter free rein, and it's horrible. All of this is as big of a miscarriage of justice as ever exists. So I hope one day to be able to have a conversation with Prince Harry and tell him if he's concerned about democracy, if he's concerned to better describe our form of government as a constitutionally Republican form of government, then he should focus on the vertical protection of federalism and the horizontal protection of separation of powers. Because this kind of unreviewable legislative discretion has historically been reserved for despots and tyrants like King George III. So this is tyranny, and we must address it. We will ultimately overcome it because the American people choose the right thing at the end of the day. Look, the Heritage Foundation's mission, its entire reason for existence, is something that understands the people of the United States are best served by a government that understands and honors and respects the principle of self-government. They've been a voice of reason and an advocate for our shared American values, reminding us of the power of individual liberty and the importance of limited government. Their dedication to promoting a society based on these ideals helped shape the course of our nation, and we're all better off for it. So as we move forward, the challenges facing our country will continue to grow. They're growing faster than ever. We need the Heritage Foundation now more than ever. And I'm so grateful to Kevin Roberts and his amazing team. They do extraordinary work, and I salute them. They will continue to be a force for good in coming years, and I'm so proud to stand with them and with you to support a better, brighter, and more prosperous future for all Americans. May Almighty God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.